I'm super delighted to welcome, I hope, 3 fantastic panelists. The first is here to the summit. We've got Jessica Hindlian from TVSquared, Dan Aversano from Univision, and Andre Swanston from TransUnion. So welcome all. I'm sorry we're not in Vegas and on stage, but I'm sure you'll agree this is a close second. So let's dive straight in. I'm going to ask each of you just to introduce yourself briefly, and then I'd love you to tell us how you think the use of data changed during the last 18 months. How did the TV market shift or change focus or start to mature in terms of the role and importance of data during the last 18 to 24 months or so? Jessica, why don't you kick us off?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much, John. Happy New Year to everybody. I hope you can see and hear me okay. Great to be with all of you, and thanks for having me. I work at TVSquared, and I work on identity and strategy and partnerships, and I'm thrilled to be here with you. And John, I don't know if you want me to go straight into my answer or let everyone do into straight in. Okay, great. So you know, I think it's pretty obvious that we've seen a huge acceleration in, you know, the shift in consumption patterns over the last 18 months. But what I think that ultimately means is that the data that we're able to actually access now, it has grown in terms of scale. You know, if you think about what's happened with connected television and what's happened with other forms of premium video, we're just really still at the beginning of that. And that's not to say that linear is going to go away by any stretch of the imagination, you know, but I really do think that we're at a point now where we're seeing so much growth, even in our own business, because everyone is leaning in and wanting to work with this data, and there is more data available than ever before, whether it's MVPD or OEM data or more digital signals, more device IDs, more CTV IDs, etc. And that makes it much easier and much more scalable to make, for that kind of interoperability to exist in the market.
Great answer. Let's jump swiftly and seamlessly on. I'm hoping that Dan, you're going to be the first speaker today who's going to have a guitar solo at some point. Those behind you.
Dan, I could be the entertainment, since we're not all in some Vegas club.
Dan, give us your sense. Obviously, at Univision, you are driving a lot of the work that the business is doing with data. What changed in the last 18 to 24 months? You heard Jessica's view. Would you echo it?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, the gist that I took from that is it's no longer about testing. You know, I do think everybody is now sort of full-fledged into the space of how to make better use of data in the marketing ecosystem. I think in the last 18 months, I think what you've seen, particularly on the media company and agency side, I think you've seen a double and tripling down on the ad tech side of this, right? And if you think about some of the big partners like a Mediaocean and others, that is really the talk right now, is how do we bring scalability to these things in a much, much bigger way? You know, the notion of does it work, is it worth it? We answered that. You know, frankly, I think we answered that 3 to 5 years ago. I think the real question now is how do we operationalize this in a way where this is the 80, 90% of the way we do business instead of 10 to 20%. And again, I think you're seeing that from most of the major mediacos, certainly from the vendor ecosystem, and I think the agencies are getting there as well. You know, at Univision, this is what we've been focused on for the last 6 months, is literally re-engineering and re-architecting our technology roadmap so that, you know, in the next 2 to 3 years, everything is about precision and aggregation at scale. So that to me has been the biggest change in the last 18 months.
Yeah, this is no longer a bolt-on or a silo. This is now the center of your business. I'm guessing this is all man from heaven for you and your business. What's your sense? Obviously, you've been through 18 months of tremendous change. You got acquired. But when you look at the wider market, what really changed in your point of view? Would you echo what Jessica and Dan are saying?
Yeah, look, I definitely wouldn't disagree. I think, you know, one of the anecdotal things that I'll share is between the first week of March 2020 to the second week, so about 6th of April 2020. So in that 6-week period, the amount of data that we aggregated grew what we projected it would be in 18 months. So pretty much the amount of data aggregation coming from ad-supported streaming on connected TV or streaming audio grew 6 quarters in 6 weeks, right? So that I think is indicative of kind of how important data has become for people to be able to do everything. And when we talk about like the most advanced media companies, obviously we're going to talk a lot about the advertising, but it's from start to finish, right? So the most advanced companies are doing everything from using that data and insight to play Moneyball with content production and content licensing, to media personalization and recommendations to help lower churn or keep engagement so people can see more ads, to obviously the targeting, the measurement, the attribution, the privacy, opt-out compliances, data. So I would say the big difference is that it's just, I think there's more of an acknowledgement across the ecosystem that data is kind of critical to every aspect of their business.
Let's talk money then. So Dan, I'm guessing you've got a team, you're spending on tech, you're building up quite interesting capabilities, but that involves investment. When the CFO says, Dan, show me the money, you know, where are we going to make more money, either tomorrow or 3 years from now, from the money that you're spending? Where is the money? Where do you see the real commercial opportunity at this point?
Yeah, and I'll talk about it from both sides of the coin, from a media owner and a content owner, right, and a publisher perspective. Better use of data creates better yield on your inventory, right? The reality is, you know, it's no different than where the airlines were probably 15, 20 years ago. You know, you have so many seats on a plane, impressions or spots or units, and you want to optimize the way in which you're monetizing those. Inventory is sort of the same exact equation. And there's lots of rules in terms of who can sit in which seat and who wants which seat. So by pairing the best inventory, the best impressions with the best advertiser, the one who values it the most, that makes the inventory more valuable. It means people are willing to pay more. Now, that has to go hand in hand with increased efficacy, because if it doesn't, it's not worth it, right? So the reality, and I know it's super cliche, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like that Jon Wanamaker quote from way back when, I know half of media doesn't work, I just don't know which half. We actually know which half, right? And data has helped us to start to understand that. As we focus more and more on precision and how we make better use of that data in actual activation, now you can actually start to ensure that you're putting the right ad in front of the right person, which creates more efficacy. So the ROAS and ROI for the advertiser goes up, even if the media owner puts some of that value back in our pocket. It truly is an equation of, you know, the marketer will get a higher return on that and we can get a higher price. There is that much room in the inefficiency as it exists today.
So Jessica, I can see you nodding to lots of what Dan said. And I guess when we talk about attribution and about yield management or yield maximization, that's something you're very familiar with. Would you agree? Is that where the real commercial opportunity is here in TV?
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think it's interesting if you look at the local TV market as a sort of a proxy or a case study for what you know, what's gone on in the ecosystem over the last 10 years, that is where the most dollars bled the most quickly out of that part of the market into digital media like Facebook and Google, because of the ability of, you know, and the desire for local advertisers to be able to really attribute and measure. And so I think that, you know, what's interesting about that is if you take a step back and you think about how do we actually then, you know, bring those dollars back, if you will, into television, and how do we at the same time bring dollars that have left the national linear ecosystem back, it does become about that need for optimization rather than anything else. So, you know, we go from a state where there's money leaving the market and frankly, you know, we need to make it as easy as possible to get that for our customers and our clients at the end of the day to be able to, you know, operate so that they are having this, you know, this optimization cycle that we all want to see happen. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's how the money starts to return. We make it easy. We make the data much more readily available, and we operationalize it. And that's sort of my whole point of view on it. And that will bring, you know, that'll bring the dollars back.
So Andre, I mean, operationalizing data and building out the workflows to support the the kinds of activities that Jessica and Dan are talking about, it's not rocket science, but it's not far off it. There's a lot of complexity there. How mature are those workflows today? You know, when you look at the kind of clients you work with, is everyone working in roughly the same way and it's pretty standardized? Or actually is there a huge amount of unevenness and variability which creates inefficiency and complexity for the buyers?
So this is almost a trick question, right? Because if I said yes, I don't think I'd be being honest. And if I say no, then you're kind of acknowledging that there's a wide gap in terms of the capabilities of the media companies and the agencies. I'll go with the honest. So yeah, yes, there is not consistency that there should be, and I think part of the challenge is because there's different levels of sophistication from the across the different companies. I think in a way though, audience data could be the great equalizer. Look, all the hype that everybody's talked about over the last 5 years is first-party data. And first-party data is amazing. The reality is that the overwhelming majority of the targeting that happens across connected TV or streaming audio and other mediums is you still using third-party data. And you can be a small mom and pop app that gets 50,000 viewers a month, and you could access the same third-party data from reputable companies that a large multi-billion-dollar media conglomerate can. So I think data is a great equalizer. You know, where one of the things that was funny is a lot of the big ad-supported over-the-top streaming solutions now, most of which have been acquired by major media companies. Back in 2016, we couldn't convince most of the agencies to advertise on them because they would say, oh, we only want premium. and what data is able to show, well, what is considered premium? If it's viewable and it's the 18 to 34-year-old household with, in market for a pickup truck and you're advertising for a pickup truck, is that not premium? And so I do think that because of the access of data, whether it's through programmatic platforms, through DMPs and others, that it does negate some of the issues with the inconsistencies in internal capabilities. But I think the big differentiator over the major media companies is scale of that audience. So great, you can find the audience, but I've got 20 times more of it, right? And that's an issue. Or I can supplement that third-party data that we can all get access to with the first-party insight that I've invested in getting. And that's really, I think, the differentiator at this point.
That's really interesting. And I guess Dan sort of layered on top of what Andre is saying is that TV is obviously a very complex medium. You know, Univision distributes channels and streaming services across numerous different devices. Those are aggregation platforms. I'm guessing some of them, from your point of view, are very data rich. Some of them are relatively data poor. It's getting harder to do exactly the same kinds of data-driven thing on every platform uniformly. Tell us a bit about how you deal with that kind of complex distribution environment.
Yeah, so it's a great point. And look, the distribution environment has become infinitely more complex, right? If you think about it, most major media companies had a handful of distribution endpoints in the MVPDs back in the day. And now we literally have dozens, if not close to hundreds in some cases. And all of those different endpoints have different technology, have different data, at times have different rules, different compliance components. It is extremely complex. This is why, again, the concept of aggregation is key. And Jessica, you kind of said it before, we owe it to the marketing community to bring simplification to that, right? And you need to find ways to aggregate all of that supply and make it really, really easy to buy the premium reach that people come to expect from us. So there certainly is a technology component to that. And that's sort of what I mentioned earlier. I think the last 18 months, everybody is focused on how they retrofit their legacy disparate technology stacks so that you can build single deals and proposals. This way you can actually activate a single target across multiple endpoints. Some of that comes down to obviously the technology, as I mentioned, but also data, making sure that you can pipe the right data in the right place. And I think you heard that, the previous panel, when Jon was talking about this, right, this idea of interoperability of data is going to be really, really important. There's one other piece though, and this is something that, should be important to everybody, but unfortunately it often falls to Univision, I think, to make this case, which is, look, the representation of multicultural audiences in a lot of these whether it's DMPs, first-party data sets, third-party data sets, is really, really important. And all too often, it is an absolute afterthought, right? We have found that, in this conversation of new currency and new data activation partners, most folks do not accurately capture multicultural, whether that's Hispanic, whether that's Spanish language, in our case, certainly very important to us. That's something that we need to do a better job of as an industry. It's actually something that scares me a lot, particularly in this currency conversation, where you have media companies saying, well, I'm just going to start using blah, blah, blah data set, and that's my currency now. And then you find out that, oh, actually in that data set, there's no over-the-air TV consumption, or that they're reporting, in our case, I'll use Hispanic population at like 6% when it's like 19%. And that doesn't seem to bother them, but that's actually a really big problem, right? So that's something that as an industry, we need to get a lot better about how we're ensuring that we're accurately reflecting the population as it exists and not just sort of running to the next shiny object.
And Jessica, that question that Dan raises about data quality and veracity and perhaps even accreditation is something that we've spoken about in the past. And I know you've got quite strong views on this. Does the industry need to develop standardized processes for vetting or vouching for the quality of data? So the kinds of issues that Dan is kind of talking about are better understood and can be dealt with more systematically as an industry.
So it's interesting. There's a lot of ways to answer this question, obviously. And, I think the obvious answer is it depends on who you talk to. A lot of people would say, yes, there is, and I'm trying to be a little delicate in how I answer this question right now for obvious reasons, but I think it depends who you talk to. I think overall, there isn't, if we're talking about replacing a currency, then there isn't a standard today that exists that enables us to do that easily and seamlessly, because you do have this kind of sort of patchwork quilt, if you will, of data that's across the ecosystem, regardless of what it is, whether it's MVPD or smart TV data or first or third party. And then you get into the complexity of the availability of the different identifiers that are tied to that actual data. And so, I think that we're at a place where we're starting to see more collaboration with, the likes of what Dan mentioned with OpenAP and what we're seeing with the TV Data Initiative. And that's why we believe in, having a very open and interoperable framework. It was just, we built our platform that way for that very reason. But I do think that there will come a point where we will have to have some standards defined, and, how to define a household, how to define an individual, whether or not an IP is really an IP, because an IP address, depending on where it comes from, carries different levels of data that are attached to it. And so for attribution and measurement, it's extremely important that we understand all of these things and have some clarity so that we can provide the right, not the right, but provide the most accurate read back to our customers. And I think that goes for all of us, regardless of what part of the business you're in.
And there's part of me that wants to say, wow, this is a kind of extraordinary discussion. It's 2022, and we're still arguing about the definition of a view, a household, an exposure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Andre, presumably we need to get as an industry, wrap our heads around sorting out some of the more solvable problems, like some of the ones perhaps that Jessica's mentioned, quickly, because as we head into a more data-driven TV ecosystem, it's going to become more and more and more important.
Yeah, look, I think Justin made some really great points. I think from the standpoint of when people talk about data quality or veracity, it is impossible to have a single source of truth for if this company's viewership behavior data was right and that company's wasn't, or is this person really in market for a pickup truck versus an SUV? There's nobody that has enough data to and is agnostic to be that source of truth. But the part that we we can have consistency on. So one of the things we do with the True Audience Data Marketplace, which is used pretty much across all of connected TV and streaming audio for targeting, is if you want to be a data provider, you have to talk about methodology, there's privacy, sources of data, scale, time for update. So there's certain minimum standards to be considered a data provider at all of quality. The intricacies of if, this person really wants a pickup truck versus an SUV, TransUnion isn't going to be the source of truth for 10 different auto data providers. But where it can say consistently is, well, this is how many households there are. Here's how many people reside in those households, and here's how many devices are associated with those households. And try to have a consistent, scalable way to associate all the different data that's there to those identifiers. I think that's where there can be some real headway and agreement on. But that still doesn't mean that all the actual data is great.
Yeah, sorry, just John, one point just to add on to that, because I think it's a really important point, Andre. The thing that makes me feel better about it is across the entire ecosystem, from advertiser to agency to media company to all of the data partners, vendors, technology partners, everybody is talking about, and with more seriousness than ever, the ability to actually work together to solve some of these problems. That is something that I feel really good about. And I can tell you, look, having started OpenAP many moons ago, that was a weird conversation when we first started that conversation with Viacom and Fox back at Turner. And it was like a really funny thing getting us all in a room together. There were lots of lawyers and it didn't feel normal. That feels really normal now, right? So I do think there is sort of this overwhelming willingness to sort of roll up our sleeves and share data and share best practices in a way that we never have as an industry, right? This idea of co-opetition, I think, really did take hold. And look, from a Univision standpoint, obviously we have a vested interest in ensuring that our audience is accurately reflected. We're willing to share our data with the ecosystem, right? If we have better data about US Hispanics, we want to use that data and let people enrich their data with our data, and we're completely open to that. That's something that like 5 years ago, I couldn't imagine a media company saying. But those are the types of things that we're hearing today. So I do feel better about our ability to try and solve some of these things together, as opposed to everyone trying to go it on their own.
I think it's a great point, Dan, and I agree wholeheartedly with what all three of you said in relation to that topic. Jumping our conversation on a little bit, where is there scope for cooperation and collaboration to really help the TV industry unlock the full potential of data? So obviously, almost every major media owner is building out first-party data lakes. They've got customer relationships. They've got really interesting data pools. They can enable lots of different types of data-driven advertising and attribution and so on and so forth. And those individual strategies are in many cases maturing very rapidly, and people are getting very good at doing this stuff. They've been doing it for the best part, in many cases, of 5 to 10 years. But where is there still scope for collaboration, working together to make this stuff work better and more seamlessly, with the view that a rising tide can lift all the ships? I mean, Jessica, do you want to kick us off? I know you have some views on this, and then Dan and Andre, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think that, frankly, the collaboration that Dan was describing before, it's not optional, really. It's not if we want to keep the money in this part of the market. And, I think that what will be interesting is watching how fast we can continue this process of collaboration and sharing information over the next couple of years, to get to the point where the market looks very different. And I'll leave it there, but I think that that's essentially how we see it.
Andre, where can collaboration and cooperation help to lift the tide to the benefit of all the ships?
So I think it can only help, right? One of the things is, if you're a large wall garden, or you think you have a massive competitive advantage, I can understand why there's less of a motivation to. I mean, you could look at it in a way that you're giving up a competitive advantage against others. I think the reality is that because there's so much media fragmentation, which even with the consolidation and the acquisitions, is actually increasing. The opportunity, even for the largest of media companies, to collaborate is actually better than trying to take advantage of whatever differentiation they may have. The other thing is, I think oftentimes in this industry, we get so focused on connected TV, say, versus linear TV. The reality is there's more homes in the US that have a smart TV and a smart speaker, right? So they're streaming connected TV and streaming audio than a smart TV and a cable box. And so, and they all have mobile devices and all these things. And so another reason why I think the collaboration is going to be necessitated and going to be an advantage is because it allows people to be more part of the broad ecosystem. And I think that obviously there's challenges because you're talking about different identifiers and stuff like that. But I think everybody is, for the most part, even the Googles and the Amazons, I think they realize there is some advantage to collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll talk about it from the very specific Univision point of view, which is, look, we see sort of the data quality and representation issue every day with every partner that we work with. So much so that we're now investing, back to that CFO conversation. So Wade Davis, who obviously is the CEO of Univision, Wade has greenlit us putting a lot of time, effort, money, and resources into standing up what we think will be the industry's most representative Hispanic household ID graph. Obviously, we'll use that to power our advertising capabilities and solutions. We'll use that for content creation. We'll use that for customer acquisition. But we're also going to use it to help others enrich their data sets. And we think that's an important role that we can play, given the unique position we're in and the relationship we have with our viewers and our fans. So using our data to enrich other data is actually part of our strategy going forward, to the exact point of, we think all boats rise with that tide. So it's something that you would think a media company typically wouldn't jump to do. And I can tell you my previous life, I probably wouldn't be very quick to start giving out, MBA IDs. Now there's compliance, there's privacy components that all need to be worked through, but that is the intent, right? We firmly believe that, hey, if we have great data about this very important consumer segment, let's figure out the right ways where we can share and collaborate with that data to make data better. And that's something we're working with Andre and team on as well, right? So again, that data enrichment piece is, I think, a small example of how at Univision, we're all in on collaboration.
I mean, I have to say, it's music to my ears to hear you all say that. We're running a little short of time for this particular conversation, so I wanted to move us on again and talk a bit about 2025, which is a theme in this leadership summit. So you've heard from lots of industry leaders over the course of this afternoon. I'm sure you've been glued like I have. I've been here for all of it, so I've certainly been glued. And you've heard a lot about what different marketing organizations and media businesses are doing to get ready for this more data-driven ecosystem we're moving into. What do you see as the priorities for big media companies? What's the work that still needs to be done individually to get us where we need to be in 2025? I mean, people are moving at quite different speeds, as you said. Jessica, do you want to kick us off? When you talk to clients or media owners, is there work that they should be looking to do that they're not necessarily already doing?
I mean, I think what immediately comes to mind is something that Andre said early on in this conversation, which is that there are certainly varying levels of sophistication throughout the business. And that's not just true on the buy side. That's true on the sell side. I think our hope is that we collectively move away from being what has always traditionally really been a futures market. I mean, that's been the television business, to one that is a more unified view of linear and connected TV pulled together, that we're able to optimize in as close to real time as possible. And I think, it does come back to, the need for more data to be available to different parties. And to Dan's point, there's not enough data in certain segments or, certain demographics that's widely available today. And so collectively, we have to solve for that, because not solving for it, we will just continue to see dollars bleeding out of the market. And frankly, the consumer, at the end of the day, it becomes all about the consumer journey. And if we're not able to deliver the best experience, regardless of where that video is being consumed, then we're not going to succeed, unfortunately. And I think, the ability to, for us to collaborate and really work towards that as really the ultimate goal, really sort of will enable us in the process to make the matching and the onboarding and all of the mechanics that go on behind the scenes run more smoothly, because we really don't have a choice in the matter. I think it's not an option.
Great answer. I love the thinking behind that. Dan, let's jump to you next. So when you look at what you and your team are going to be doing over the next couple of years to get fit for 2025, what do you see as the big priorities?
Yeah, I think there's probably three, maybe more, but I'll stick to three. The first is technology. Media companies need to get very serious about technology. Again, I think most are, and I think that's where you're seeing a lot of the time, effort, and investment, right? In the way that we work with companies like Mediaocean and Salesforce and Operative and Google and Freewheel. I mean, we need to really re-architect what those stacks look like. People typically have legacy linear technology infrastructure, then they have a cobbled together vendor, selection on the digital side. Making sure that all of those things work together in concert, really, really important, right? That is the only way we get to meaningful aggregation in this business, is by investing in the right technology to make it simple and easy, where you can have single proposals, single points of activation, single points of measurement. So that's the first piece, I think, technology. And I think by 2025, I think it's reasonable that you're going to see some really big strides being made there and tons of investment. It is a very good time, in my opinion, to be in the ad tech business, particularly on the sort of pitch to pay process. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, I think we're starting to see the shifts of focusing on the rear view mirror and actually turning around and looking forward and looking out the windshield, looking forward instead of looking backwards. If you think about what this industry largely has been built on, it's been built on a rear view mirror. Tell me what you did yesterday. Tell me what the delivery was. I can measure it. Even in digital, we started to build towards that, which is crazy because it's a dynamic endpoint by nature, right? However, you have things like DAR that cropped up, which now all of a sudden, okay, after the fact, tell me how many impressions actually should count and shouldn't, right? So this industry historically has been very much focused on the rear view mirror. Tell me what happened yesterday. What I see happening is a bit of a flip to focus way more on activation and what's going to happen tomorrow, right? I think that's really, really important. So this idea of measurement and currency, I think, becomes less of a conversation, because I think everything becomes about forward-looking activation and optimization, right? How we make better use of predictive analytics across both linear and digital to make better decisions about tomorrow. Care less about what happened yesterday, care a lot more about how to do something better tomorrow. That's the second thing. And then I would say the third thing is about outcomes and attribution. And it kind of dovetails out of that second point. Attribution is a space that I think we've made incredible strides in the capabilities. However, the business models and the way in which we use them, I feel like, are stuck in, like the 90s, right? It takes a long time. They're expensive, really, really hard to turn it into actionable insights. So I think you're going to start to see this shift, and we're starting to do it now, where you close the gap between the planning process and the attribution process, and you actually start to plan and optimize on outcomes, which I think then leads to meaningful guarantees on outcomes, right? There's a lot of chatter today about guaranteeing an outcome. That feels a lot more like a parlor trick, right? If you don't have the right data to actually predict and optimize an outcome, like, anybody can guarantee anything. It's probably well known that most media companies underdeliver media deals. What's the difference if I underdeliver on website traffic versus impressions? I'm still making it good with inventory. It's a bit of a parlor trick. But if we invest in the right technology, data, and analytics, we're where we can actually predict and understand if I put this ad in front of this person, or I put this ad in this spot on my linear schedule, and I have a sense or prediction of what the impact is, now I can optimize. Now I can meaningfully move to a guaranteed outcome. I think you're going to start to see that happening. Some media companies are starting to do that today with some great vendor partners.
I think there's a fascinating vision, Dan, for the future, and one I'm sure that we will be talking about more often.
Hopefully in Puerto Rico.
Yes, well, roll on. That'll be the summit in Puerto Rico, everybody. We look forward to seeing you there. Andre, over to you, sir.
Yeah, I'll be really brief. Over the next 5 years, a couple things. So one, I think we're going to see massive amounts of kind of cross-media consolidation. So in order for major media companies to compete with the Facebooks, the Googles, you're going to see TV companies buying radio companies buying traditional print, because the need to be able to engage consumers across multiple touch points is going to be critical, or else you kind of get pigeonholed out. So I think there's going to be so much M&A that it's going to blow people's mind. I think there's also going to be a lot of people that technology providers that aren't here. Just like there's hundreds of DSPs 7 years ago, and there's maybe a dozen now that have 99% of the scale. Everybody does identity resolution now. I mean, everybody, right? With no foundation to do so in many cases. So I think you're going to see that consolidate. I think you're going to see some winners, and we're never going back to one measurement person, but I think you're not going to see 100. Maybe you see 10 or 6 or 7. And so I think those are going to be the things. You're going to see the technology, the data, the insight, and the media companies consolidate, which will help with the interoperability for all this stuff we're talking about to actually come to fruition.
I love your 3 visions of the future. That's been absolutely fascinating. Dan, Jessica, Andre, we are sadly out of time. I could have gone on for hours, and I hope we will do so in the near future and in person. A massive thank you to all of you for your contributions to this discussion. Here's to 2022, and see you all soon, I hope, in the flesh.